What if I told you there are places flying the American flag where you can wake up, still carry a U.S. passport, still collect your social security, and yet somehow feel like you stepped off the mainland treadmill? No renouncing citizenship. No complicated visa maze. No disappearing into some foreign bureaucracy. You're still under the same flag, just operating at a completely different speed. Hidden beyond the familiar outline of the 50 states are U.S. territories where life can feel surprisingly affordable. No income tax, no sales tax flashing at the register. That means you're keeping nearly your entire paycheck. Housing and everyday expenses are far more manageable than on the mainland. And above all, there's sunshine almost year-round. A slower rhythm, no rush hour, no long winters, just a lighter, brighter version of America greeting you each morning. So before we assume we've seen the full map of opportunity, let's zoom out. 15 overlooked territories. 15 very different definitions of freedom. You might realize the American map is a lot bigger and a lot more flexible than you were ever told. Let's get into it. You might have been through this before. Inflation, restructuring, globalization, market corrections that somehow only correct your retirement account. What if we told you there's a place where you might be able to step away from some of that pressure? And the best part is, you don't have to go through complicated administrative procedures. Now enter Puerto Rico. Same flag, same dollar, same passport in your pocket. You can move there tomorrow. No visa, no renouncing citizenship, no awkward embassy appointment with fluorescent lighting and a stack of forms that smell like 1,994. You're still American, just repositioned. Here's the part that makes people lean in. Qualified residents of Puerto Rico generally don't pay federal income tax on income sourced on the island. It's written into federal law. So, for those who are tired of paying federal income taxes month after month, this could feel like a promised land. Of course, you actually have to live there, spend the required number of days, establish your economic center, make it real. This isn't, I bought a beach chair once. It's residency with receipts. So how much does it really cost to live there? Well, compared to coastal California or Manhattan zip codes that practically require a second mortgage for avocado toast, Puerto Rico can look breathable. Some people may still have concerns about the cost of living, like this following story. Cost of living can be high in PR, especially for groceries. My wife is from there originally and we visit regularly. I love it there. The people are generally welcoming, though there is a gringo go home movement. The weather is great and the beaches are lovely. I'm trying to convince my wife that we should retire there. You see, in the end, it still depends on lifestyle and location. Many people live comfortably in the $1,800 to $2,800 per month range. With that amount in other places, you might only be able to rent a studio, let alone cover housing, food, transportation, and everything else. Here, housing is often significantly lower than in major mainland markets. If you're trying to stretch a retirement portfolio another decade, that math starts to matter. But let's not romanticize it. The power grid has improved since past storm seasons, but outages still happen, though not as often as before, which is a plus. But in our opinion, we think it's a minor inconvenience, as we are talking about tropical storm in a tropical island. It's something hard to avoid, isn't it? So, it's not all perfect, but it's definitely worth the try. Do you think you might ever consider moving here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wished you could keep your entire monthly paycheck without losing a portion of it to taxes? It sounds like science fiction, but you might be surprised that a place like that actually exists. And the best part? You don't even need to flee the country. Guam is the answer to a question no one knew they were asking. It's a U.S. territory just like Puerto Rico, but in the Pacific, halfway between Hawaii and the Philippines, which means it's basically on the opposite side of the planet from anything you've ever scheduled on time. It's tomorrow there, literally. If you move to Guam, you're essentially living in the future. You'll be texting your friends back home while they're still having dinner yesterday. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the confused American at the airport. Yes, Guam is part of America. Yes, you can move there. No, you don't need a passport. Yes, they use U.S. dollars. So there's no need for currency exchange. And no, it's not part of Japan. We know at this point you're probably more interested in the paycheck part, right? Let us explain. Once you establish residency in Guam, your income taxes are paid to the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation instead of to a separate state. Notably, Guam does not impose an additional layer of state income tax. You essentially pay at a rate equivalent to federal income tax, but without the added state income tax burden that exists in many other places. For those moving from states with high personal income taxes, this shift can create a noticeable difference in take-home pay each month. In addition, Guam does not charge a sales tax directly at the register. When you make a purchase, you won't see a separate sales tax line added to your receipt. Instead, businesses pay a 5% gross receipts tax, and that cost may be reflected indirectly in the price of goods and services. Even so, the consumer experience often feels simpler and more transparent than in places where sales tax is added on top of the final bill. At a time when the cost of living continues to rise in many states, Guam's tax structure can sometimes create the feeling of keeping more of what you earn. And for many people, that alone is enough to turn a Pacific island into something more than just a vacation destination. It becomes a place worth seriously considering. You're tired of checkout screens suggesting a 25% tip right after handing you a muffin. You're tired of waking up to gray skies and heavy snow that forces you to shovel the driveway before sunrise. You want an exit, but not one that requires learning a new currency. Check out the U.S. Virgin Islands, where you can soak in warm tropical sunshine instead. There are 3 main islands, Street Thomas, Street John, and Street Croix, plus a smaller one called Water Island, which sounds like someone ran out of naming ideas. All of them are U.S. territories, meaning legally American but spiritually on permanent vacation. You can live there as a U.S. citizen. No passport required, no complicated paperwork, and certainly no need to justify your life choices to a consular officer. Street Thomas is the liveliest shopping, cruise ports, and enough frozen cocktails to color a midlife chapter. Tourists pour in like it's a theme park without closing hours, and locals have mastered the art of politely pretending not to notice. St. John is the opposite national parks, hiking trails, and quiet beaches. It's where people say, just breathe, and the Wi-Fi isn't as strong as your connection to nature. A poetic way of saying, don't expect flawless Netflix streaming, but be ready to meet someone who brews their own kombucha and has very strong opinions about coconuts. Street Croix is larger, calmer, and interestingly, different. It has history, art, and that unhurried atmosphere of people who seem to have left something behind and now just want to paint driftwood and slow life down. And don't worry, we'll break down this trio of islands in more detail later in the video, so make sure you stay until the end. Many Americans may go through most of their lives without ever hearing about the Northern Mariana Islands. Yet the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, or CNMI for short, AUS, Commonwealth in the Northwestern Pacific, appears to tell a very different story about freedom, not the loud kind, but a quieter form, conditional, and clearly bounded. U.S. citizens can move there, live, and work without a visa. The U.S. dollar circulates. Basic citizenship rights remain intact. But upon closer look, CNMI may not fully resemble any of the 50 states. The most significant difference lies in land ownership. Under the Covenant Agreement from the 1970s, CNMI joined the U.S. DISN system while retaining control of land for indigenous people. Outsiders, including U.S. citizens from the mainland, generally can only obtain long-term leases, often 50 to 99 years, rather than permanent ownership. For those accustomed to the concept of freehold property as part of the American dream, this may sound somewhat unfamiliar, but on closer reflection, that may represent a long-term defensive strategy. As many beaches around the world have been transformed into massive resort zones, and as investment capital flows in and out in cycles, CNMI seems to have chosen to keep the key in its own hands. Land remains within the local community, culture is not diluted too quickly, value is not rapidly inflated by short-term speculation. In a sense, stability appears to be prioritized over complete openness. From a business perspective, CNMI seems more flexible than many states with dense regulatory systems. Certain service sectors, construction, and light tourism may operate under more streamlined legal requirements. Income taxes here are generally lower than in high-tax states. That does not make it a tax haven, but it may create a lighter financial environment for freelancers, small business owners, or those who feel their annual profits steadily eroded elsewhere. American Samoa is an unincorporated territory. It falls under U.S. sovereignty, but it is not a state. Not every provision of the Constitution applies in the same way as it does in Texas or Ohio. Its representative in Congress may speak, but does not hold full voting power. A small detail on paper, yet when considered carefully, it reflects a noticeable political distinction. Individuals born there are classified as U.S. nationals, not automatically U.S. citizens. They may live and work on the mainland. However, if they wish to become full citizens, they must go through the naturalization process. This may sound technical, but for someone accustomed to the clarity of the federal system, it could be one of the more profound legal differences that still exists under the same flag. Then there is land ownership. Roughly 90% of land in American Samoa is communal land, managed according to tradition. To own land, one generally must have at least 50% Samoan ancestry. Outsiders are largely unable to purchase property in the way mainland real estate markets operate. There are no large-scale land acquisitions, no resort developments rising along the shoreline immediately after a new zoning plan. The Matai system, traditional chiefs, continues to play a central role in land and community governance. This structure is protected by territorial law and respected by the federal government. For many Americans accustomed to a fully open market system, this may seem unusual, yet from another perspective, it appears to be an intentional choice. Culture before commerce. The outcome is not difficult to anticipate. Outside real estate investment is limited. Large capital flows rarely penetrate. There are no rapid land price surges. But there are also no miles of hotel corridors, no massive cruise ports receiving thousands of visitors each day. Stability here seems to come at the cost of slower economic growth. Within the system of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, Saipan appears to play a central role. It serves as the capital, home to administrative agencies, courts, and most financial and service activity. If CNMI is a small machine in the Pacific, Saipan may be its main gear. The largest share of the population is concentrated here, forming a community that blends Chamorro, Carolinian, and workers from various parts of the Asia-Pacific region, diverse yet not chaotic. The rhythm of island life still remains. Compared to Tinian or Rota, Saipan seems to hold a clear advantage in infrastructure. Francisco C. Ada International Airport serves as the primary gateway, connecting to Guam and several destinations in Asia. Roads are more developed. Transportation services are more flexible. Supermarkets, banks, hotels, and hospitals are largely concentrated here. Telecommunications and utilities appear more stable than on the smaller islands, though they still depend on imports and maritime supply chains. And if you have ever seen how a major storm can disrupt power grids on the mainland, reliance on imported resources on an island in the middle of the Pacific may not feel entirely unfamiliar. The difference is that life here tends to move more slowly. And when things slow down, people may find more time to think. Saipan's economy seems to revolve around tourism and services. Before global disruptions, visitor flows from East Asia generated significant revenue for hotels, restaurants, and retail. When tourism cycles decline, the impact may spread quickly. Yet, as the center of CNMI, Saipan often recovers sooner than Tinian or Rota. Its hub status appears to provide a degree of relative stability within a small economic ecosystem. Beyond tourism, certain construction activities and federal presence in the Pacific region also seem to provide an additional economic cushion. Not enough to transform Saipan into an industrial hub, but perhaps sufficient to reduce reliance on a single revenue source. For those who have witnessed mainland industrial towns shift after a factory closure, the lesson of diversification may already feel familiar. If Saipan is considered the center of CNMI, Tinian may represent the reverse side of the map. It remains under the U.S. legal framework through the covenant, uses the U.S. dollar, and operates within the familiar federal structure, yet its pace appears entirely different. The population numbers only a few thousand, not tens of thousands. Just a few thousand. Tinian once held historical significance in the Pacific region. In recent years, reputable outlets such as Stars and Stripes and the Associated Press have reported on the potential expansion of military training activities there. That could bring moderate infrastructure projects, possibly generating temporary income and employment. But few would seriously expect Tinian to become a bustling urban center, and perhaps that is precisely part of its appeal. The domestic market here is so small that you can almost see its limits. Few retail stores, limited financial services, minimal large-scale business expansion. If you are looking to build a second retail chain, this may not be the destination. But if you have already experienced enough revenue races and tense financial quarters, those limitations may feel somewhat liberating. The community in Tinian appears close-knit to the point where nearly everyone knows one another. That can create a sense of safety and connection. Yet for those accustomed to the anonymity of mainland life, it may also feel insular. Every choice here carries two sides, and perhaps those with experience understand that no model exists without trade-offs. If we are talking about places that are rarely mentioned within U.S. territories, Rota may sit near the bottom of the list. Among the three main islands of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, Rota often appears to stand behind Saipan and even Tinian in terms of investment visibility, tourism presence, and infrastructure development. According to population data from the U.S. Census Bureau, it is the smallest in population among the three, and perhaps that is exactly what shapes its distinct identity. If you have watched well-known mainland beaches gradually fill up with condos, resorts, and multi-level parking structures, you might view Rota differently. The beaches here seem to retain a more original character. Coral reefs, vegetation, and shorelines do not appear overly crowded. There are no long lines of cruise ships docking each week, no sense of scheduled tourism. The pace of life seems noticeably slower than in Saipan. And for many who have spent decades working under market pressure, interest rate cycles, and rising property taxes, that slower rhythm may not be a disadvantage. Tourism income is not as abundant or consistent as on the central island. Large corporations appear less interested in a small market. Restaurants and lodging services feel more local than global chain-driven. Yet for that very reason, Rota does not seem entirely dependent on international tourism cycles. When a particular visitor market weakens, the ripple effects may not be as intense as in destinations heavily reliant on foreign arrivals. In addition, the housing market in Rota is small and relatively stable. Home prices and rents appear lower than in Saipan and many other tourist areas. Less speculation, less competitive pressure. For retirees, investors living off portfolio income, or remote workers, this may create a more manageable financial equation. That said, as an island, Rota still depends on imports. Food and consumer goods may cost more than on the mainland, but when considering total living expenses, the overall picture may remain within a controllable range. It does not sound unreasonable, does it? St. Thomas is one of the islands of the U.S. Virgin Islands. It is not as quiet as St. John, nor does it feel as isolated as many smaller islands. In some ways, it resembles a compact version of tropical America. You still use the U.S. dollar, still fly domestically from the mainland, still operate under the U.S. legal framework. Yet when you open your door in the morning, you see blue water instead of a supermarket parking lot. One factor that makes the island stand out may be its healthcare infrastructure. For many people, choosing an ideal place to live is no longer only about scenery or beaches. It becomes about where the hospital is located, whether specialized care is available, and whether one must travel hundreds of miles for advanced treatment. Compared to smaller islands in the region, St. Thomas appears to hold a clear advantage in medical facilities and healthcare services. It does not transform the island into a major medical hub, but it may provide enough reassurance for those concerned about long-term health planning. Then there is the matter of connectivity, Cyril E. King International Airport creates the sense that you have not truly left the United States. Direct flights to several major mainland cities likely reduce the feeling of isolation. The port at Charlotte-Amalie also contributes to a more dynamic environment, with cruise ships arriving regularly. That brings revenue, employment, and a pace of life that feels more active than islands populated almost exclusively by local residents. Of course, that liveliness can be a double-edged sword. If you are seeking absolute quiet, where only wind and waves fill the air, St. Thomas may not be the ideal choice. But if you want an island experience without feeling disconnected from the broader world, this place appears to strike a rather interesting balance. St. Croix seems to be the quieter older brother among the three main islands of the U.S. Virgin Islands, larger in size than St. Thomas and St. Pras. Yet it does not appear as frequently in cruise ship promotional images. Located about 40 miles south of St. Thomas, that distance may represent more than geography. It creates a certain separation economically, in pace of life, and perhaps even in attitude toward the outside world. While St. Thomas is often viewed as a busy cruise hub with a dense rhythm, St. Croix seems to have chosen a different path, less dependent on visitors who arrive and depart within a few hours, fewer large retail chains, less commercial noise. The two main towns, Christiansted and Frederiksted, carry a strong mark of Danish colonial architecture. These places also regularly host community art events. Painters, musicians, craftspeople, the creative community here appears more vibrant than many might expect. Because of its larger land area, Street Croix's housing market seems broader than that of Street Thomas. In some areas outside central Christiansted, prices may be more moderate. However, building materials depend on imports, so construction and renovation costs are often not low. Food and consumer goods prices are directly influenced by shipping expenses. When logistics costs rise, residents may feel the impact almost immediately. All right, let's move on to St. John. About 60% of Street John's land area belongs to the Virgin Islands National Park, and you can see how that reality appears to shape the entire structure of the island. You cannot simply purchase land and develop a large complex. You cannot turn the coastline into rows of commercial storefronts. Much of the space here seems to be set aside for Caribbean dry forests, for small coves, for trails winding along the hillsides. When most of the island is national park land, privately owned land becomes limited. And when supply is limited, value often rises. Home prices and rents on Street John appear higher than in many other parts of the USVI. That may be understandable, since you are likely paying for proximity to strictly protected nature. This does not seem like a market for bargain hunters. It may be better suited for those willing to pay for space, for bay views, for mornings without constant traffic noise. And of course, no matter how beautiful the scenery may be, there are risks. A Caribbean location implies recurring weather exposure. Recovery after major storms may take time. Certain specialized medical services require travel to another island or to the mainland. In addition, the labor market is small. Diverse career opportunities are limited. If you are still in the stage of building a career, this may not be the ideal option. But if you have accumulated sufficient assets, have independent income, or simply no longer wish to live at the speed of the mainland economy, those limitations may no longer feel like the primary obstacle. When mentioning Palau, many Americans might pause for a few seconds to locate it on the map. Palau is a sovereign nation in the Western Pacific. It has its own government, its own constitution, and a seat at the United Nations. But since 1994, through the Compact of Free Association, commonly referred to as COFA Palau, and the United States have established a relationship that many American men over 55 might find interesting in its own way. The United States assumes responsibility for Palau's defense. In return, Palau receives financial assistance and maintains a clear strategic alignment with Washington. Recent renewals of the COFA agreements appear to further reinforce that relationship for years to come. What stands out is that U.S. citizens may reside long-term in Palau, provided they comply with local laws. No complex visa process like in many other countries. At the same time, Palau does not operate like Florida or Texas. You do not automatically receive every federal benefit as you would while living in a state. Land, for example, is generally not permanently owned by foreigners. It is typically leased long-term. Taxation, residency rules, and legal matters are administered by the Palauan government. In other words, this seems to be a soft gateway. You remain within America's strategic orbit, yet no longer inside the familiar administrative machinery of the 50 states. And then comes the factor that gives many people pause: distance. Palau lies thousands of miles from the U.S. mainland. There are no convenient daily non-stop flights like between major American cities. Travel often requires connections through Guam, Hawaii, or parts of Asia. Visiting family may no longer be a simple weekend trip. It could require planning, budget, and patience. Economically, Palau has a population of just over 18,000, according to recent international data. The labor market is small, and industries are not as diversified as in the United States. Tourism, especially diving and ecotourism, is considered a primary sector. The Palauan government has at times pursued policies to limit visitor numbers in order to protect marine ecosystems. Financial assistance from the United States under COFA plays a significant role in the national budget. That may provide a sense of relative stability, but it also reflects the limited scale of the economy. This is likely not a place for someone seeking a dynamic market or large-scale business expansion. Do you think this place could be for you? Let us know in the comments below. Midway Atoll lies in the North Pacific, almost halfway between North America and Asia, about 1,300 miles northwest of Honolulu. It does not belong to any state. It is an unincorporated U.S. territory, managed directly by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Department of the Interior. What makes Midway distinct may be this: there is no permanent civilian community living there. No town, no local council, no suburban neighborhoods. Only scientists, conservation staff, and a small number of personnel working on short-term assignments. Much of the infrastructure consists of remnants from its military past and facilities supporting ecological research. There are no regular commercial flights. Access requires special permission. No hotels, no resorts, no tourism billboards. By modern standards, Midway appears almost out of reach. And then there is an interesting question. What makes a piece of land ours if no one lives there? Midway is not a place for settlement, not an investment opportunity, and not a dream retirement destination. It does not generate direct profit. It does not produce waves of tourists. Yet, it remains part of the United States map. Located between Hawaii and Guam, about 2,300 miles west of Honolulu, this small coral atoll seems to sit exactly where most Americans never think about. Legally, Wake is an unincorporated territory of the United States. It does not belong to any state, has no civilian governor, and no local legislature. On paper, it is administered by the Department of the Interior. In practice, most operations are run by the U.S. Air Force. After the Cold War period, Wake continued to be used for logistics, testing, and transit purposes. According to analyses from the Congressional Research Service and various defense publications, the island has functioned as a small but necessary link between Hawaii, Guam, and the broader Western Pacific region. Today, the number of personnel stationed there is relatively limited, yet military and training activities appear to continue at a level aligned with modern strategic needs. While territories such as Guam or Puerto Rico have civilian communities, local economies, and social life, Wake seems to exist almost purely because of its location. It contributes to expanding the United States' exclusive economic zone in the Pacific. It is worth noting that Wake has no permanent residents, no town, no schools, no corner grocery store, only a runway, logistical facilities, and temporary housing for rotational personnel. There are no commercial flights you can book for a weekend trip. To get there, you would almost certainly need an official reason. Today, staffing levels remain limited, yet operations and training activities appear to continue in line with contemporary strategic requirements. Wake Island may never become a settlement destination. It may never appear in travel advertisements or on best places to retire lists, but hey, it is still part of the U.S. And finally, we have Johnston Atoll. Sounds unfamiliar, doesn't it? Legally, Johnston is classified as an unincorporated territory of the United States. From a maritime legal perspective, Johnston appears to contribute to the vast U.S. exclusive economic zone across the Pacific. A small dot on the water, yet potentially extending control over hundreds of thousands of square miles of surrounding ocean. That alone might cause some people to pause and wonder, how wide does the true footprint of America really reach? Like several other islands on this list, Johnston Atoll has no permanent residents, no town, no school, no grocery store, no civilian hospital. In the past, only military personnel and contractors served there on rotational assignments. At present, the island has virtually no civilian life. Johnston usually appears only within the category of U.S. minor outlying islands. On many standard maps, it is reduced in size or grouped into a tiny inset box. There are no economic headlines tied to it, no political debates centered around it, and perhaps that is precisely what makes it a true relic. Not a relic of stone or concrete, but a relic of a period when American presence stretched steadily across the open ocean. And perhaps, after going through all 15 names from the familiar Puerto Rico to Johnston Atoll, which almost no one mentions, you may begin to notice something interesting. Freedom does not seem to have just one definition. For some, freedom might mean a more favorable tax structure. For others, it could mean a lower cost of living, less pressure on a retirement portfolio built over decades of work. These territories are not magic solutions. They do not promise a perfect life. They come with limits, trade-offs, and factors that deserve careful consideration. Yet they seem to open a larger question. Could the map of opportunity within the American system be far broader than what we see in daily headlines? What about you? Out of these 15 territories, which one made you pause a little longer? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear from you. Finally, please note that the content in this video is compiled from publicly available sources, official documents, and analytical references. The video is created for the purpose of exploring and providing information about the states of the United States. Viewers should conduct further research through official sources of each state and consider their personal needs before making any decisions related to living, investing, or traveling. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next explorations.